This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Severe hunger hits southern Madagascar with over 1 million people in need of urgent food aid. A damning report on the COVID response says millions died because global leaders did too little too late. And Israel's Prime Minister threatens to use an iron fist if needed to crack down on ongoing unrest. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The world economy to fare better than earlier projected, according to the United Nations. And mismanaged public pension schemes in Nigeria leave many retirees broke. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, we start the hour in Madagascar, where severe hunger has hit the nation's south, with more than 1 million people in need of urgent food aid. The situation has seen people resorting to desperate measures to survive, such as eating locusts, raw red cactus fruit, or wild leaves. Some are also leaving their villages to reach urban centers supplying food. The World Food Programme says about 14,000 people are estimated to be at catastrophe level. This number is expected to double over the next lean season. The nutrition situation among under fives is reported to be deteriorating to alarming levels. Acute malnutrition has almost doubled over the last 4 months, from 9 to 16%. Consecutive years of droughts and poor rains have hampered food production. WFP urgently needs $74 million over the next 6 months to address the situation in southern Madagascar.
The malnutrition rates on average has gone over the past 3 months from 8 to 16% on average in all the districts. But in some districts, it has gone up to 27%. This is alarming. This is life-threatening. And whichever way you look at it, this is starvation happening before our eyes. We cannot allow this to continue. We need to do everything that we can to do that. WFP stands ready and is assisting people with the current available resources we have, which will run out in the next 2 months. We need donations now in order to be able to meet the needs over the next few months.
After nearly a year of review, an independent panel looking into the COVID-19 pandemic has released a blistering report. It says the catastrophic scale of the pandemic could have been avoided and that the World Health Organization should have rung the alarm bell sooner. The panel laid out a list of recommendations to prevent another event on this scale. Tony Waterman has the details from Brussels.
The pandemic panel held nothing back, saying the global devastation experienced over the past year and a half could not only have been averted, but was exacerbated by a toxic cocktail of poor coordination, unpreparedness, and protectionism.
This is an ongoing disaster that we believe could have been prevented. The evidence shows that an outbreak became a pandemic because of failures, gaps, and delays in preparedness and response.
While the panel hailed clinicians in Wuhan for quickly recognizing a cluster of patients with a potentially new virus, they lambasted the hoarding of information and the cumbersome nature of global systems designed to respond to health emergencies, likening them to an analog system in the digital age. The panel also criticized the World Health Organization for taking too long to declare COVID-19 a public health emergency of international concern. But some of the most scathing critiques were directed at rich Western countries, whose inaction in early 2020 led to overwhelmed health systems and a winner-take-all scramble to secure protective equipment and medicines.
Too many countries, including some of the wealthiest, devalued the emerging science, denied the disease's severity, delayed responding, and ended up sowing distrust among citizens with literally deadly consequences.
More than 3.3 million lives have been lost so far. To prevent history from repeating itself, the panel laid out a list of recommendations, including giving the WHO more power to swiftly investigate emerging outbreaks, something that may be controversial for some countries. It also calls for the creation of a new financing facility with a budget of up to $10 billion a year to fund preparedness.
Access to vaccines will be crucial to ending the current pandemic, and the panel called on rich nations to donate 1 billion doses to COVAX countries. It also said that while the U.S.'s decision to get behind patent waivers was a step in the right direction, vaccine makers need to voluntarily license and transfer production know-how. If that can't happen in the next 3 months, the group said the waivers should be triggered. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, in the latest on the coronavirus pandemic, India has reported another record number of new deaths, bringing its death toll to above 250,000 people. 4,200 more people died in a single day. Infections jumped by nearly 350,000. Even then, health experts warn the real numbers are being underreported, with some believing the toll could be up to 10 times higher. Vaccines are also running short, especially in the country's two biggest cities, Mumbai and Delhi. The World Health Organization says the variant driving India's surge has now been found in 44 countries. The Maldives is the latest to impose a travel ban. All of this as fear and desperation grow among people in India.
A coconut was worth 35 to 40 rupees before, but now the price has risen to 80 rupees. As a small vendor selling fruit and vegetables, I have to buy coconuts at high prices to sell because my wife has been diagnosed with COVID-19. I have to do so to help her recover, even if I have to pay a high price.
I do some contract depending work in New Delhi, but the pandemic has led to fewer jobs. I can't even get my pay from government projects. Now the prices of nearly everything have doubled. You can't buy much food with 200 rupees. The epidemic and lockdowns have placed heavy pressure and posed a grave challenge to our lives.
Now, India is one of the biggest suppliers of generic drugs to Africa. But with the South Asian country grappling with a COVID-19 crisis, supply chain disruptions are causing scarcity and driving up the cost of some drugs. Deji Badmus has more on the situation in Nigeria.
Long before India faced its devastating resurgence of COVID-19 cases, the impact of the pandemic itself on drug supply was already being felt in one of Nigeria's biggest pharmaceutical markets. A huge amount of drugs sold in this market in Kano State, northwest Nigeria, comes from India. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit last year, supply began to dwindle. But with the current situation in India, the man who heads the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria says supply to the country could be further impacted.
We anticipate that there is going to be some negative impact because India is the world's factory for manufacturing, especially pharmaceuticals. Nigeria, for example, and countries that depend on importation will have some impact. And I think many companies are yet to recover. So they're like going from bad to worse.
He says the impact could hit a wide range of drugs other than the COVID-19 vaccine.
We saw several APIs, raw materials from India, both antibiotics, antidiabetics, antihypertensives, and other medications that are commonly used in our country. And what is worse, certain dosage forms. For example, injectables are hardly made in this country or in West Africa, so we have to import those dosage forms that are injectables. But the range is large.
In March, Nigeria received nearly 4 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine manufactured by the Serum Institute of India. It's only the first batch of the 16 million doses promised by COVAX. But with India now restricting COVID vaccine exports and prioritizing domestic demand, there are fears Nigeria's second batch may not be arriving anytime soon.
Well, that again creates some downside for us and for the world. First, that India is a manufacturing hub for the globe. both AstraZeneca and other brands are manufacturing have some of their plants in India. So first, there is a reduction in global supply. And when that reduction in global supply happens, Africa and by extension Nigeria will have issues.
The government has been injecting funds into the pharmaceutical sector to ramp up production of some generic drugs. At least 26 local pharmaceutical companies have so far benefited from a low-interest loan scheme initiated by the central bank to build capacities in the industry. But with the COVID-19 vaccine, there's yet no local capacity for its production. And it's why Nigeria is hoping the COVID-19 situation in India abates as quickly as possible. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The World Health Organization says it's reviewing coronavirus data from Seychelles. This follows claims that more than a third of people who tested positive for COVID-19 in the past week had been fully vaccinated. But both the ministry and the WHO have stressed that the majority of those who tested positive had not been vaccinated or had only received one dose. The Seychelles has fully vaccinated over 60% of its population. 38,000 people were given China's Sinopharm vaccine, and the rest got the AstraZeneca shots produced by the Serum Institute of India. The Seychellois president has dismissed a Wall Street Journal report blaming the COVID-19 outbreak there on the efficacy of Chinese vaccines. Well, CGTN spoke to Rustin Vanier over the situation in the country. He is the chief editor of the Seychelles news agency.
You know, the numbers of the person that is infected right now, when you look at the number, you will see that 70% of the person that is infected is people that didn't have take any dose of the vaccine, or they have take maybe just one dose of the vaccine. But when you look at the 30%, the other 30%, it's person that have taken, yes, the two vaccine, but they have been infected just 1 week after they received the second dose. And at that time, there was not 100% immune by the second dose of the vaccine. But when you look at the situation here in Seychelles, you will be able to see that at the hospital, you have only 2% that is in critical situation. You have 40 person that are in the hospital with very mild situation. They just have some cough. But when you look at the rest of the situation, those who are infected, they just are in quarantine at home with not this kind of situation that we will see a lot of people that have COVID-19, the situation that is very alarming. Now here in Seychelles, the situation is very under control. The message that the government always asking the people is come forward, take the vaccine, because we have enough of a vaccine for all the population. But you know, in all the country, you have some people that don't want to go forward to take the vaccine. And this is why sometimes you have situation that you have increasing of people that have they don't want to take the vaccine. But in the same time, the government is continuing to say, you know, we have the tourism industry, and we want to show the world that the tourism industry here in Seychelles is safe for you to come. And if you are part of this war to be vaccinated, that means Seychelles will be seen as a country that is safe for tourism, and it's safe not for tourism, but it's safe for the population in general.
Meanwhile, China has hit back at the Wall Street Journal report on the Seychelles, which questioned the efficacy of the Chinese vaccines.
There are some Western media always trying to smear Chinese vaccines' efficacy and safety. It's not the first time they have spread false information about China. For countless times, they have exposed their typical and unhealthy mindset that everything regarding China should be negative. If they really care about the effectiveness and safety of the vaccines, then why do they selectively avoid reporting on cases of side effects in their own country? Why do they turn a blind eye to the fact that the Chinese vaccine has been approved by the WHO for its safety, effectiveness, and high quality, And why don't they look at the fact that some Western countries who once were stockpiling vaccines gave empty promises and failed to deliver a single shot to some countries desperately in need?
2 people have been killed and dozens wounded as Sudanese security forces dispersed a rally. Hundreds gathered in Khartoum to demand justice for protesters killed during anti-government demonstrations in 2019, calling for an end to President Omar al-Bashir's rule. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has expressed shock at Tuesday's killings, saying it was a crime to use live bullets against peaceful protesters. The Tuesday demonstration started shortly before Iftar, the evening meal which breaks the fast during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The army has vowed to bring to justice anyone involved in the killings. And to Israel now. The country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is promising to crack down and quell the unrest that is gripping the country.
We are continuing our efforts to stop the anarchy and restore governance to the cities of Israel, with an iron fist if needed, with all forces needed and all authorities required.
Well, the Prime Minister was speaking in the northern city of Acre, where protesters torched a Jewish-owned restaurant and hotel. Authorities have declared a state of emergency. Violent protests have erupted in towns across Israel, set off by tensions over the holy city of Jerusalem. Israel carried out hundreds of airstrikes in Gaza into Wednesday morning as Hamas fired multiple rockets towards Israel. At least 55 people have been killed, nearly all Palestinians. This has been the heaviest fighting between Israel and Hamas since 2014. Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Zimbabwe may carry out a mass culling to reduce its elephant population. And at the front line, while the rest of the globe retreats, celebrating nurses around the world. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Zimbabwe may carry out mass culling of elephants for the first time since the 1980s. The culling would be a way to reduce the number of elephants whose population has now exceeded the country's carrying capacity. Farai Makutoya has more with this report.
There are an estimated 100,000 of these lumbering pachyderms in Zimbabwe, 3 times what the country can manage, according to government, which is considering culling to defuse a ticking time bomb.
The challenge really we are facing is that if we don't take any action now or anytime soon, we will be faced with a situation where these animals will die in large numbers because of starvation. So it's something that is of concern to us, because now we have these huge populations which we cannot sustain. And that's where we then say culling has become a viable option now, a real option.
However, some wildlife activists dispute the official figures.
Elephants are free-range animals. They move from one country to the other along the conservation transfrontiers, right? You find that elephant moves from Zimbabwe to South Africa through the Limpopo conservation transfrontier, from Hwange to Botswana through the Kavango Zambezi conservation transfrontier. So what is it that we are calling Zimbabwean animals?
Activists say the Parks and Wildlife Management Authority should not hide behind poor resourcing as an excuse for failing to manage the jumbos.
They should be able to approach the international community for conservation funds. The money is there. What they need is to improve is to be transparent and accountable on how those funds are managed.
Government says adverse reactions to the mooted cull are too hasty.
We have our scientists looking into it so that they then inform us on the specific approaches that we can take if they recommend that we go that route. Our decisions are always scientific. We give the experts room and support for them to then give us advice.
Previously, Zimbabwe has translocated wildlife abroad as a means to lower numbers, but the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, has tightened regulations on the destinations to which it can move animals. That's left the country with limited options to deal with the growing number of jumbos which are increasingly coming into conflict with human beings. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
As the world marks International Nurses Day, nurses in Uganda are picking themselves up from more than a year of battling COVID-19. The pandemic placed them under unprecedented pressure, and as CGTN's Leon Senyanga reports, it's taken a toll on their mental health and the wider healthcare system in Uganda.
Flavia Namugai goes about her daily rounds. A year ago, she was being pushed to her limit, working on the front line of Uganda's fight against COVID-19.
This was something really new, and no one was really sure of how it spreads, at what rate. It was a disease that just being studied, so there was a lot of fear.
Namugai and her fellow nurses were worried about contracting COVID-19 and about their families too. But she says she sees her profession as a calling, so she had to keep going.
I entered this profession when I loved the profession. I loved nursing. I wanted to be a medical profession at one point. So my nursing career wasn't put to a weighing scale. I didn't think of any one day that I'm going to quit nursing because of COVID.
Nurses like Namugai are relieved there are now fewer COVID patients in hospitals. But with the effort they put in, many feel there needs to be more recognition of their work. Nurses have been described as healthcare superheroes around the world, learning how to fight COVID-19 as the months go by.
We have learned the prevention and how best we can manage COVID. And indeed, after all what we have learned, once we put it in practice, it has worked for us, and that's why COVID has reduced.
Fighting the pandemic comes at a cost, though. Some nurses have lost their lives. The working conditions have been tough. The pay is also low. This May, the health workers under the Uganda Nurses and Midwives Union threatened industrial action over a pay dispute.
The most pressing issue is salary increment, salary disparities. If we are graduate nurses, they are graduate doctors, let us all get the same pay. Let our salary also increase so that we can be able to look after our children.
The government has promised funding of up to $130 million for the next financial year. In the meantime, the nurses keep putting in the hours, saving one life at a time. Leon Senyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, over the last year, the pandemic forced many of us to retreat to our homes. But nurses, of course, have been at the front line fighting the coronavirus and other diseases. And as the world celebrates them, on Wednesday, we spoke to Halima Adan, the Director of Nursing Services in Machakos County in Kenya. And this is what she had to say.
We wish all the nurses in the world a happy International Nurses Day, all the way from Kenya. My message to the world is nurses all over the world are dedicated to join hands with all the healthcare workers and the governments in the systems all over the world to fight this pandemic. As nurses, we shall not give up. We shall walk this journey with humanity until we are able to defeat this virus. That is my simple message to the world. We promise hope, and we promise that this is going to be over, and we are going to continue with our lives normally as before. For me, the biggest lesson is that governments need to prioritize healthcare. Healthcare systems need to be given priority. They need to get enough funding. We have managed patients where even oxygen lacks in hospitals. Focus has been in the healthcare system. We have seen equipment being purchased that were never purchased before. So to the whole world, for us, the lesson is that healthcare must be prioritized, healthcare must be funded adequately, and the health workforce must be motivated, because nurses remain the single most important workforce around this pandemic. So the allocations and the strengthening around healthcare systems must be done, and it's not an option. People need to come together, talk to each other, and ensure that we have working systems so that we are able to save humanity, because that is the core business. For us to have a government that is functional, we have to ensure that people are alive, and it is the government's responsibility to provide and join hands with healthcare professionals like nurses who know what is lacking and what needs to be done.
Many migrants from sub-Saharan Africa believe that the dangerous Mediterranean crossing from Tunisia to Europe is one of the only ways to build a better future. This is according to the Tunisian Social Observatory. The number of people risking the crossing from Tunisia is now rising, and for the first time, the majority of those on the boats are not Tunisians. Adnan Chouachi has more.
The Association of African Students and Trainees in Tunisia revealed that thousands of irregular migrants are working in deplorable conditions in many countries in the North African region. Tunisia and Libya are the first destinations for irregular migrants who are planning to reach European shores.
The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed African migrants into poverty. Many people accepted to stay in Tunisia and the region in general while working illegally and saving money until they found an irregular migration route. However, the general lockdown and the economic crisis have exacerbated this alarming situation.
The Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights announced that authorities in Tunis thwarted 42 crossing operations and intercepted 409 Tunisian and sub-Saharan African migrants in April alone.
The majority of people who pay for irregular migration with all their savings chose death over life. It is unacceptable for Tunisia to become the favorite destination for Africans who are risking the dangerous sea crossing. It is a human tragedy. Unemployment and social precarity are increasing, and the number of victims is rising, especially this year.
Amid reports of record increases in migrant deaths at sea, European Union countries, especially Italy, are building on cooperation with Tunisia and Libya to stem migration flows.
The agreements serve the interests of the Europeans. Our coast guards are not paid to protect the borders of Europe. Increasing control at sea does not stop the migration wave. The whole strategy must be reviewed because it failed to reduce irregular migration.
Since the beginning of 2021, Tunisian authorities prevented more than 3,500 migrants from reaching the Italian coast. The Interior Ministry has recorded that more children and women are risking their lives in the Mediterranean. The Tunisian Social Observatory has denounced Italy's strategy of outsourcing the containment and pushback of African migrants by boosting the capacity of the Tunisian and Libyan coast guards. Activists say Europe needs to put in place more practical social and economic measures to reduce irregular migration. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Private schools in South Sudan are calling for dialogue with the government. This follows the Education Ministry's decision to set fixed fees for independent schools. The government order comes as learning institutions reopen across the country after more than a year of closures due to COVID-19. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
According to South Sudan's Ministry of Education, private schools must not charge more than $340 annually for day students. Boarding schools are not allowed to charge more than $850 per year.
A businessman is not satisfied with the money
So he cannot charge reasonable, can charge anything, but there must be a limit, and there must be regulation, and that's why we have regulated this.
The Education Ministry also stopped private schools from charging extra fees for materials such as textbooks. The owners of private schools argue that the government did not consult them.
Previously, even we have been battling with some of the education officials who come to our schools and charge very expensively in terms of town rent, town rates, which we have never heard about it. Like for the case of my school, they came asking even backup dating up to 2016, and you have to pay, which you could go to something millions of money.
There is nowhere in the act, I mean in the law, which indicate that they set school fees for each and every private school.
Private schools say they are faced with a high cost of operations and need to hire foreign teachers to provide quality teaching in schools. They also say the requirements to be put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19, such as water for hand washing, soap and hand sanitizers, have pushed expenses higher. The UN's Children's Agency, UNICEF, says it is donating 900,000 face masks for students across the country. At the moment, water is in place for hand washing, learners are wearing face masks, and social distancing is kept in class. But the UN says the challenge will be in maintaining the standard throughout the time children will spend in school. Most schools in South Sudan don't have reliable water sources such as boreholes or tap water. Water supplies used for hand washing are purchased on a daily basis, and the schools say it is expensive. Public education infrastructure is virtually non-existent in South Sudan, and many here rely on private educators. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The world economy to fare better than earlier projected, and that's according to the United Nations. And mismanaged public pension schemes in Nigeria leave many retirees broke. Now, the United Nations says the world economy will fare better this year than previous projections have indicated. However, a slow rollout of COVID-19 vaccines in many developing nations will hamper economic recovery. Now, according to the latest World Economic Situation and Prospects report, global economic growth is expected to reach 5.4%, bouncing back from a contraction of 3.6% in 2020. But the growth outlook in some nations in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America remains pretty fragile and uncertain due to the slow vaccination progress. Now, the UN report also notes that China and the United States are forecast to see economic growth of about 8.2% and 6.2% respectively this year, with China being a main driving force for global economic recovery.
The fact that is playing a very important role, the robust investment in China that happened during the last 6 months, and also the merchandise export has increased significantly in terms of electronics and electrical equipment, digital equipment, and all the parts and all the other the manufacturing export from China actually has been very robust, and it has exceeded the pre-crisis level. That is also driving the growth outlook for China.
And many pensioners in Nigeria have been left penniless as the government struggles to meet their retirement payments. The backlogs are blamed on corruption and inefficient systems in government. That, of course, could change as the government says it has begun cleaning up the system. Here's CGTN's Phili Haza reporting from Abuja.
74 years old Uzoma Ignatius retired after 31 years of civil service in 2005. He needs cataract surgery but lacks the funds to pay for it because he still owed 5 years arrears from his pension.
The next surgery will be in July. This one cost me over 100,000, and this thing will be the same thing. So I feel if they will help and pay us that so that I will be able to treat this other one in July.
Millions of pensioners across Nigeria are facing tough times due to non or irregular payment of what they were owed after retiring. The pension industry has been marred by years of corruption and theft by some government officials. According to the Nigerian Pension Reform Tax Team, about $800 million of stolen funds was recovered between 2010 to 2013. Several arrests of corrupt officers have been made, and the government also introduced a new pension program called the Contributory Pension Scheme in 2004.
Unlike previously practiced, the new pension scheme is now a 50-50 arrangement between the government and the pensioners. Workers get to contribute part of their wages while in service as pension, rather than wait for the government alone to fund their pension when they retire.
This has partly taken the burden off the government, and pension experts say the new scheme is also structured better to prevent corruption now that it's a public and private partnership.
The old scheme is exposed to all these forms of corruption because there is no laid out best practices as to how it is managed. But with this tripartite arrangement, where you have the regulator, National Pension Commission, a government agency, you have the pension fund administrators, private entities, and then you have the pension fund custodian. That way, it is foolproof, fully protected from all forms of corruption.
However, as of 2019, over $1 billion of pension funds were still owed by the government, mainly accrued from the old scheme. Experts say until the government pays out its outstanding debt, the problem will linger.
All the years you have worked before the contributory pension scheme in June 2004, all your government is still owing such a person. So until they send that money to your retirement savings account, before your pension fund administrator will now contact you for processing and payments. So you see, that is one of the issues, the ills of the old scheme that has actually snowballed into the contributory pension scheme.
Last month, the government promised to clear all outstanding payments to its retirees by the end of the second quarter in order to phase out the issues from the old pension scheme. That's something that could help the likes of Ignatius improve their standard of living and tell better tales about serving their country. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
And let's go to Ethiopia now. The country's sole mobile operator, Ethio Telecom, has launched a mobile phone-based financial service. Now, Telebir is expected to mark a shift for the country to cashless transactions. Ethiopia has just 19 commercial banks with a population of about 115 million people. Mobile financial services have become a significant part of African telecom operators' businesses after Kenya's Safaricom pioneered them with M-Pesa in 2007, giving people an alternative to banks. Now, the Tuesday launch comes as the government prepares to sell a 45% stake in Ethio Telecom as a part of a broader liberalization that will see the auctioning of 2 full telco service licenses.
We expect that 21 million users will register for the service, according to our plan and strategy. One of these, we expect that 12.7 million will be active users.
If we open it up before we have built a national capacity in this aspect, it will not make us beneficiaries, because we do not have sufficient experience that will make us ready for the competition. That is why we didn't include the license for mobile banking when we gave 2 licenses for telecom operations. The Ethiopian government has forfeited $500 million at least. Ethio Telecom is expected to compensate for this lost $500 million.
Now, for many years, a community of women pottery makers in Nigeria's Plateau State have led the way in the indigenous production of ceramics. The global market of the industry is estimated at around $200 billion. Of course, with Nigeria's economy now under pressure to diversify away from crude oil, experts are now calling on the government to make the pottery sector one of the mainstays for generating revenue. Here's CGTN's Tessem Akende telling us more from Jos.
Jamila Musa has been making pottery for 21 years. Cooking pots and flowered vases like these are some of her specialties. It's a craft, she says, that was passed on to her by her forefathers.
We learnt the art from our parents and grandparents. From it, we take care of daily needs and sponsor our children through school.
Jamila is one of millions of women in rural Nigeria who make pottery. Intricate pieces can take up to 2 weeks to complete. But despite the arduous production, the best pottery still only sells for about $5, not enough to eke out a living. For decades, the pottery business has been these women's livelihoods. But with more support, they are hoping to expand production and therefore profits. The United Nations is urging countries to develop their artisan industry, which could supplement economic growth and livelihoods. The development of Nigeria's pottery sector has been very slow. Critics say it's because the government has not offered enough support to help these women modernize their craft. But there is huge potential. About $1 billion worth of annual local demand alone, according to the government.
We need to diversify our economy away from depending so much on oil. There has been a conscious effort by government to assist local pottery makers engage in mass production, support them with funds to finish and brand their product better to meet international standards, as well as expose them to training that will help them market their product online and on a global scale.
The government says it's taking this seriously. In May, it established the Nigeria Investments and Growth Fund to promote innovation in its local production. It is expected to support investment in commercially viable projects like pottery.
Clay, ceramics is one of the things people can actually use to develop the economy, to improve the lives of the citizens, even those living in the rural areas. They will stay in the cottage industries in our villages, and we reduce the problem of urbanization and overpopulation in the city.
Such opportunities are what potters like Jamila hope for to mold a better living for themselves. Tassim Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
Well, let's go to Tunisia now. The country has secured $75 million from the World Bank. It will be used to boost entrepreneurship amid a COVID-19-induced economic slowdown. Now, the program will also increase access to finance and support the growth of innovative startups, as well as small and medium-sized enterprises in the country. From Tunis, here's Adnan Shaushi with the details.
The $75 million project is designed to support the Startup Tunisia program and to catalyze the creation and growth of startups. The initiative also aims to finance digital and innovative small and medium-sized enterprises.
This new project will support startups and SMEs by providing the necessary funding to improve their performance and develop their projects. Our objective is to create jobs and wealth. We are launching a new dynamic in the Tunisian economy. It is based on new technology, creativity, and innovation.
The Innovative Startups and SMEs project will finance the Consignments Fund subscription to the Anava Seed Fund. The fund is geared towards meeting the financial and growth-related needs of SMEs and will be financed by the German Development Bank.
The World Bank is financing the contribution of the Tunisian government to the Anava Fund of funds with $45 million. $30 million will be provided by the KfW and the EU. The World Bank then helps the government put its contribution to the Anava Fund. The final objective is to mobilize $200 million in partnership with Germany, the EU, and the private sector.
According to the Director General of the Deposits and Consignments Fund in Tunisia, the $75 million funding will help incubators and business accelerators.
We've launched a new ecosystem support component called Flywheel. The program will support and accompany startups and SMEs run by women or operating in inland regions.
World Bank funded Tunisia Innovative Startups and SMEs project is supported by the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ. Startups and SMEs in Tunisia have become an important source of employment and growth, but access to funding remains a key constraint. To address the challenges facing SMEs, the government has launched an ambitious program to boost entrepreneurship and inclusive economic growth. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, the Airlines Association of Southern Africa is again pleading for financial assistance. We'll have the details on that at top of the hour. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Got time for a short break. There'll be more after this.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Muslims around the world are celebrating Eid alFitr this week, the festive few days that follow the holy month of Ramadan. Cull is a sweet that is popular with Muslims during this period. Yasser Hakim takes a look at the treat and its origins.
The sugar-coated sweet is the main reward after a month of fasting during Ramadan. Shops prepare for it from early on.
We begin preparations a month before. The first 10 days of Ramadan, we start preparations and buying the ingredients. We then begin production, and in the last 10 days of Ramadan, we start selling the cull for the Eid.
Traditionally, families bake it at home, but now most prefer ready-made deliveries.
We bring flour, the cull flavor and fragrance, ghee and sesame. We mix it thoroughly until it is blended together. We then add water, sugar and yeast and mix it all. When it holds itself and is strong, we make the familiar rounded shape and then heat it in the oven for 25 to 30 minutes.
Cull dates all the way back to ancient Egyptian times. It's shaped like a sun with its rays because queens used to offer it to the priests as respect for the sun god Ra 4,000 years ago. Later, Egyptian rulers would stuff it with gold coins and hand it out to the poor during Eid. Since then, it has become a tradition to consume it during the Eid holidays. But in the last 2 years, COVID has had its effects on the demand for the popular sweet.
Before the coronavirus, demand was huge. Last year was tough because the curfew was at 5 p.m, so sales dropped. This year sales are a bit better, but we hope it would improve in the future.
But one thing's for sure, it will remain a main component in these annual festivities. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Zimbabwean boxing is punching through COVID-19.